Now, when you look at BPE as an entity, you also think of the ICRC, that's the arm responsible for concessioning, and you also look at AMCON. Isn't this a multiplication of roles?
Not really. The role of AMCON is totally different. AMCON is an asset remedial agency. So they basically are looking at assets that are coming out of debts, that are owed by the private sector. And once they recover the assets or the underlying assets, on those financial obligations that that various creditors have defaulted on, it's totally at their discretion how they dispose of those assets to realize the loans that they have purchased, from the banks. So that is a completely different mandate that AMCON has. Now, for BPE, what we do basically is that we are the transaction managers for the assets that are, due for privatization, concessioning, commercialization, any form of reform at all regarding an asset or an infrastructure, essentially is the responsibility of the Bureau of Public Enterprises. And because we don't own those assets, we then need to get a power of attorney from the MDA, or from the respective MDA that owns the assets. So for example, when we concession marine ports, the NPA, who is the owner of those assets, of course, on behalf of the federal government, then donate a power of attorney for BPE to execute the concessioning transaction, because the skills and the competencies to do that are not typically resident in the ministry or department or the agency.
Now, if since 1993, 86 firms have been privatized with no significant impact in the economy, what did we fail to do?
We've done at least 142 enterprises, privatized, commercialized, reformed in one way or the other in the past 30 years of the existence of this program, both from the days of the Technical Committee on Privatization, the TCPC, and the Bureau. Now, from our own assessment, about 63% of those enterprises have done fairly well, very, very well. And there are many examples that I can give to you. We rate maybe about between 25 and 30 haven't done very well, and the figure in between can be rated satisfactory. Now, the ones that haven't done well, incidentally, have failed not because of privatization, they've just failed because of other macroeconomic issues, power, infrastructure, tariffs, and so on. And these are the same factors that affected, even the similar private enterprises that are in the same sector. So you have...
So these pitfalls are well known. What has been done to avoid, to forestall a recurrence of this pitfall?
Okay. I think that what is being done is a holistic solution. And the point I was making, prior to now is that you can have an enterprise that is owned by government and a similar enterprise that is owned by a private sector investor. They both do the same thing, and you will see the failure of the public, previously public-owned enterprise, but the privately owned one also has failed. I'll give you an example, the paper mills. Both the privately owned paper mills and the public enterprises, or the Iwokpen, for example, and all of those that were owned by the public have both failed. Why? Because of the underlying macroeconomic issues. So it's not privatization that caused the failure. It's just the fact that they were operating in very dire business environment. So the solution is both from the macroeconomic perspective, and also trying to provide some form of support for those enterprises. Government, and that's why in some of these cases, programs like the local content program, initiatives have helped to ensure that patronage is provided for some of the enterprises that struggled with patronage, those that have struggled with infrastructure, perhaps the cost of funds. So low digit interest financial institutions like Bank of Industry have been brought in to try and provide some financial support.
Now, before we wind down this conversation now, I see you brokering high-stake ventures running into billions of naira or more. And that places you on a hot seat from different pressures all around. Are you overwhelmed?
No, I think that you just have to develop the fortitude and the character to resist some of those pressures and interests, and they can be powerful. I'll give you an example. I'll just give you an instance, Benga. You have, a very core asset to sell. Only one core asset to sell. And there are perhaps 6 interests vying for the same asset. You can only sell to one person because it's just one asset that is available. But the 6 assets, the 6 interests are powerful interests, because for you to even have the capacity to express interest in the asset, it means that you are, fairly. So what then you need to do is to ensure that the process is set in such a transparent manner that whoever, loses out of that in that whole game, it doesn't have any recourse to query the integrity of the process. So whoever won fair and square. So if there is no interference, if there is no compromise of the process, then you have the strength, to resist the pressures and say, listen, we've handled this thing as best as we can. If you don't get this, maybe next time you'll be successful.
The Director General of the Bureau of Public Enterprise, Mr. Alex Oko,
yes.
Thank you so much for making our time to be part of this episode of Question Time. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Benga. It's nice being here. Thank you.
And that's it on this episode of Question Time from Channels Television. What's your take on the sale of national assets? Is this the way to go, or is it just a quick fix? Send us your thoughts. Send us your comments on our social media platforms. Join us next week for a fresh episode of the show on Channels Television. Many thanks for watching. I'm Benga Ashuru. Bye for now.